All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Teal. I'm on the Tableau Public team. I'm here presenting with my colleague Jade Levan. We'll be talking today a little bit about just, giving a recap of the first week of people using Viz In Tooltip on Tableau Public. Um, in this webinar today, we'll be talking first, just kind of covering the basics of what is this new feature Viz In Tooltip that came with Tableau 10.5. Next, we'll be covering some of the tips, not only some of the old tips of how people were using Viz In Tooltip to now and how they can um, make their vizzes even better with this new feature. And then lastly, we'll cover just some example vizzes, and hopefully that will inspire you if you haven't already started using the new feature to go ahead and give it a try as soon as you can. So with that, just covering, what is Viz In Tooltip? Why should I use it? Very basically, it allows you to place visualizations in the design and of your own design into tooltips, so that whenever you hover over a mark, just as you would originally with a tooltip, well, now as opposed to just text, now you have the ability to show vizzes in that tooltip, and they're able to filter based on whatever field. So in this example that you see to the left, you would have the ability to hover over that particular state, and the data that would render in the tooltip could be specifically for that state, and it could be data showed in a different way. So why use it? Well, and kind of like what I alluded to before, it's a great way of showing a different level of detail, as well as trends over time, or even a legend for the larger viz. It's a space saver, so no longer do you have to worry about having cluttered dashboards. You can use Viz In Tooltip to your advantage to allow the end user to learn a little bit more about the data, and it's also a really fun and engaging feature for your end users to play with. So with that, my colleague Jade will get into a review of some of the previous tips of how people were using Viz In Tooltip before Tableau 10.5. Jade?
Yeah, right. Hi, everyone. So before we start talking about the brand new tips that the community has uncovered, I wanted to show first the ones that we are going to retire. The first one being the one that's shown on screen. It's a post by Alexander Moe from a couple of years ago. And the trick here was to hide sheets somewhere on the dashboard. And then with dashboard actions, you would have them showing when you hover over a mark. So it can be a bit slow, and you see there is this transparency of the sheet that is visible while the sheet is loading. So definitely not the perfect workaround to Viz In Tooltip. So we are really grateful that Viz In Tooltip is now fully implemented in Tableau. The second tip I wanted to talk about is Andy Codgrave's so-called Codgravian tooltip. So it was a way to create bar charts in tooltips by using a formula, so calculated field. And this would be done by using ASCII characters like this rectangle, field rectangle, that you would just then multiply until you obtain the right number of rectangles to create a bar. A third tip that is being retired is the way to dynamically color stuff, text in Tooltip. So an example is here. You see that when I hover over stuff that is negative, it's showing in red. And here, if it's positive, it's showing in green. So this used to be done by creating different calculated fields, one for the positive green value and one for the negative red value. The one for positive would say if my value is positive, then show the value, and otherwise show nothing. And I would create the same one for the negative. And then I would have them both inside my tooltip, and I would color them, the positive one in green, the negative one in red. And as they are opposite, only one would show in each scenario. And that's how you would get this kind of conditional formatting in the tooltips. So this is no longer necessary because you can just have a different sheet where you color your dimension or your measure, putting it on colors, and then you just bring it, that sheet with its text, inside your tooltip. I suggest you try that. It sounds a bit scary, but it's actually very easy. And the last one that we are kind of retiring, but that could still be useful, is the one that was outlined by Jonathan Drumy on this Data Public blog post. It's quite long because there's a lot of logical conceptualization in there. So I won't show you the whole post, but the idea was that you had this really long formula that would allow you to put a list of elements in a dimension, like in this format, so that you could display all the elements in your tooltip instead of just having the star that doesn't let you see the whole values of your dimension. So this used to be very complex, but now with the Viz In Tooltip, you can just have your list inside a different sheet, and then you bring that inside your tooltip, and this will work as a list in tooltip. So I'm particularly thankful that we are retiring this one, because it was always a headache to set up in a Viz. And now that we've seen the old stuff that people were doing to try to recreate or to create this Viz In Tooltip, let's see the current state of Viz In Tooltip. So I have an example here, and I'm going to give you the basic education about Viz In Tooltip. So it's pretty easy. I have created a map. I have this line chart in another sheet. And if I want to use my line chart inside the tooltip for my map, I just go tooltip, and it's already here, but I'll show you how I brought it here. I just did insert sheets, and then this is the other chart that I want to use. And I just insert it like this, and it becomes available. So the elements that you can modify in your Viz In Tooltip are first the width. So you see you have different parameters. First one is the width. By default, it's set to 300, but I can make it up to 600. And now you see I have a much broader Viz In Tooltip. Then I can increase the height up to above 600. I'm not sure exactly what's the limit, but let's say I put 700. It still works, it still renders. The thing is, it's taking most of the space over my Viz, so that's probably not best practice. And when it was presented at TC, I think they kept saying if your Viz In Tooltip is bigger than 600 times 600, it's probably not good practice, and you're like creating a dashboard inside your tooltip, which is probably overwhelming for your users. So don't go too crazy with what you put inside your Viz In Tooltip. Then one thing you need to know is that Viz In Tooltip is doing a filtering action. So there is no highlighting action as of now. It's just filtering. It might come later, but it would take a little bit more time to develop. And then the other parameter that you see inside this code is the filter parameter. So you see that by default it's set to all fields. But if I have different levels of detail inside my Viz, I could actually try to filter it on another level of detail. So here, this is why I created a group of all my districts to recreate the national level. And the name of this field is Département Group. And now if I change all fields to this, you will see that now I see like the whole, all of the lines, because I've changed the filter. So if you have lots of different levels of filtering in your Viz, I mean different levels of detail, you can play with that. One last thing I wanted to tell you is that you will notice that once you've used the sheet inside your tooltip, it becomes grayed out, so it means you cannot reuse it. You could actually reuse it by just duplicate, like copy pasting the code, and you would get twice the same chart. But because of what I was telling you, it's just filtering, and also because of the fact that it's just a snapshot, it's static. The Viz In Tooltip is static, so you won't be able to modify. So let's say I wanted to get back to all fields the default. It wouldn't work because it's just a picture. So if I wanted to have both the all fields and the modified filtering, I would actually have to duplicate my sheet and bring it back here. So up, and this way I would get the 2 level of detail. All right, so that's a lot of information. I'll let you test it out yourselves, but this is an overview of what you can do with Viz In Tooltip, and it's pretty easy to play with the parameters. So on this, I will let Scott tell you a bit more about the creative use of Viz In Tooltip that we've observed in this past week, and I'm sure you will learn a lot in this part too.
Awesome. Thank you, Jade. A couple things I wanted to call out that I forgot to mention in the beginning was that first, this is a recording of a previous webinar. So if you're wondering where our teammate Johnny Walker is, he wasn't able to join us, but Jade and I are happy to cover some of the stuff that he was able to find. And one resource that I do want to call out is this. It's a very dense. You can find any information on Viz In Tooltip in this Tableau Online Help. It talks about the feature in even greater depth than what Jade and I will do today. Maybe it'll have answers to any questions as far as how you can use it, what are some best practices, some examples. Like I said, it goes into a little more depth than what Jade and I can cover today. And then another resource that are some of the new tips and creative tips that we've seen the community making. First one I wanted to call out, this was actually brought to my attention by teammate Johnny Walker. So Jeffrey Shaffer, a member of the Tableau Public community, he's not only written a blog post with 10 tips on Viz In Tooltips, but he's made 2 of them. And there's one particular, I would recommend everyone go read both of his posts with the link that's available to you. But there's one in particular from each post that I want to call out, and it's Jeff's ability in his creative application of using parameters for Viz In Tooltips. So at the very bottom, you can see that there's Jeff has discovered the way where you can use parameters to actually change the viz that you have in your tooltip. So you can see in this GIF, as he changes the parameter to show the type of viz he wants to have in his tooltip, and he's hovering over different parts of the map to show whether it's a quantity of sales or like a sales amount. That's totally dynamic and able to for you to control with a parameter. Another way that he uses parameters in his second how-to post was actually using parameters to adjust the height and width of your Viz In Tooltip. So in addition to selecting what type of viz you want to show, now Jeff is now using parameters, which you can learn how he's doing it in this post. But he's able to adjust those height and width on the fly, or leaving it up to your end user to set how big they need their Viz In Tooltip. Another blog post written by Zen Master Matt Chambers is doing the sheet swapping with Viz In Tooltip. So he's actually, you can see in this post that he's selecting a category with the sample superstore data set, and he has Viz In Tooltip, and as he's selecting these different categories, the Viz In Tooltip is actually changing. So if you find that there's a use for you to use this at your work or for play, highly recommend going to read this post by Matt Chambers. And last one I wanted to call out, which was also pointed by Johnny, was if you're working with a very dense data set, this post by Eldridge talks about how you can use bins to your advantage for Viz In Tooltip, almost as like as a zooming in feature. So you can see in this example, you can hover over any part of the scatter plot, and with the bins, you can actually zoom in to see where those marks are being displayed based on your bin sizes. So you can see you can't really see much with a really dense data set like this unless you were to change the opacity, but another great way that you can leverage Viz In Tooltip is with the use of bins to zoom in. And with that, I want to show some examples of vizzes that people have made. And this first example, if any of you are working with working with data that you need correlation and understand relationships between variables, this is a great example done by a colleague, Florian Ramseger, where he shows at first glance you can use color and even the text labels for correlation values. But if you want to dig a little deeper, so let's say you want to investigate this strong correlation of 0.94 between mean height of women and mean height of men. So now when I hover over any of these values, I'm able to see the scatter plot of all of the data points along with the trend line, so I can see how tightly all of those points are plotted together, versus if I were to have a weaker correlation value like 0.17 or negative 0.17, you can see how dispersed each of those marks are plotted. So great example if you work or if you're working with correlations frequently. This next example is by Ken Flerlage. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But in this viz, he's actually showing how you can zoom in to a line chart. So right now, as I'm hovering over this line, it's a super dense data set. And when I'm hovering over, by default, it's only filtering to only show me the specific year to which, for the point that I'm hovering over. So if I wanted to change that for a particular month, a quarter, a year, any kind of date parsing, I can hover over and see maybe what was going on with this outlier, what happened in that month. Or maybe you need to go a little more granular and look what was happening specifically during that week. So this is another way that you can be using Viz In Tooltip. Another example, kind of getting away from the whole zooming into your data, is using Viz In Tooltip to show data in a slightly different way. So this viz, which is part of I think of a recent Makeover Monday submission by Sarah Bartlett, she shows each of these columns would be a state for U.S. income. And for each of these states, as you hover over, you're able to see the actual distribution of income among that state. So the green and the pink dots would show the entire gap, and as I hover over, I'm able to see the entire distribution of income. So that's a great way that you can use Viz In Tooltip to show data just slightly differently as opposed to zooming in. This is another example by Filippo Mastroianni. Filippo, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. But as you can hover over any of these points, you'll actually see a map of where these universities are located. So if you, as opposed to other examples that many of you might have already seen, where you're actually using a map, you're hovering over a map to see more data like a trend or a bar chart. This is actually the reverse, where you're hovering over a bar chart or a stacked bar chart, and you're able to see a map for that specific mark. So great job by all four of those. And the last one I wanted to call out is by Layla Mannheim, where she's visiting hashtag usage from this past Tableau conference. So the plot itself is pretty spectacular. It's an engaging way of showing the intensity and the duration of conversations using these different hashtags. But as I hover over any of these particular hashtags, I'm able to see who were the people involved, how long were they involved, total number of views. So it's a way to dig into the data at a more detailed level. That's all the examples that I have, and then I'm going to kick it over to Jade to share some examples that she found.
Yep. So on my slide, I'll start with something simple but functional. This is, if you can see my screen, I think you can now. All right. So this is showing adult obesity in America, and it's a simple map. Well, not very colorblind friendly, but it's green and red. And then if you hover over a specific state, then you will just see how the obesity rate evolved between 2011 and 2015. So simple use case, but efficient. And it's actually pretty similar to the second one I wanted to show you, which is a bit more evolved in terms of design. I like the color, the hex map. I like the fact that Nailusa, who is the author of this example, used some annotations. And then if you hover over a mark, you will see that she gives you a trend, an idea of what is the trend over time. So this is the ratio of rich households compared to poor households, and you see how it's been evolving over the past 7 years. So similar to Mark Vermeulen's example, just more, yeah, I'd say more evolved in terms of the design. She spent more time on it, and she wanted a more polished result. And then another example, this time not a map with a timeline. This one is actually about accidents and emergency in England. So the NHS, the National Health System, has a target to treat every patient that comes to a hospital within the first 4 hours of their arrival. And this dashboard is tracking whether it's actually the case. And so the trend line here is telling you month by month how many of the patients had to wait more than the targeted 4 hours. And then when you hover over a specific point, you can see how this month was compared to the minimum month and the maximum month in terms of people having to outwait the 4 hours. So I like the fact that the Viz In Tooltip is giving context. Otherwise, you see this line chart, you see some peaks, but it's difficult to relate and to compare 2 points. So here you really see that this was a big month in terms of overweight, and the below line chart is explaining that actually it's just that the patients have been growing, and it's using the same concept of giving you context of the attendance for the specific month. So here I see that this month was kind of average in terms of attendees, while this one was the maximum month. 2 million people came to the NHS, and that's as crowded as it gets. So yeah, great use of the Viz In Tooltip. And if I keep going, I see this bar chart, and when I hover, I'm back to a normal tooltip without any Viz in it, which is also something I like because it's easy to think that you can put Viz In Tooltips everywhere and that will always be great. But actually getting back to something simple and not overusing the Viz In Tooltip is really a good thing. And my last example, so this one was by Daniel Caroli. Sorry, Daniel, I almost forgot to call you out. And the last example is the Viz of Today from yesterday by Spencer Boak. And I'd say this is kind of my favorite because I'm not a fan of soccer, and especially not of US soccer. But this Viz really really made me want to play with it, and I spent like 5-10 minutes going to Wikipedia to check the teams and understand what's happening. So the idea is that the Major League of Soccer was created in 1996 in the US, because soccer is not really big in the US. And and you're seeing the attendance, so how it's been working from a business point of view, because the idea is to get enough people to fill in the stadiums. And you've got lots going on. So if you hover over a specific team's logo, you will see the attendance of this specific team's games. Then if you hover over the line chart, you see a simple tooltip, which is what I told you is good. Like, if there is no need for a Viz In Tooltip, don't use a Viz In Tooltip. And then you have this average attendance of the game's dumbbell chart. And when you hover over a point, you see for each team what was the attendance compared to the previous year. So you see that the attendance is dropping for most of the teams. You see it on this dumbbell chart, and then you see the detail when you go to the Viz In Tooltip, and you see when it's growing again. And finally, you have the scatter plot giving you the attendance game by game, and it also has a bit of Viz In Tooltip, this time using images, which is another use case. Like, you can just display custom shapes inside your Viz In Tooltip because it's just a sheet. So kudos to Spencer. I really love the Viz and learned a lot about US soccer. That's all I have in terms of examples. We are not going to do any Q&A, but you'll have access to all the resources that we shared during this webinar. And Scott and I hope that this was useful and it will inspire you to create some more great Vizes using Viz In Tooltip. Don't forget to post them on Twitter and use the hashtag Viz In Tooltip without an S. And we'll keep watching this hashtag and selecting some cool Vizes for Viz of the Day and for the gallery. Thanks, everyone.